Hello and welcome. Thank you very much for listening in. It's my very first show, which is Switched On with Joseph Barnett. I'm going to give you an intro of what we're going to talk about today and who we've got on as guests. So today we're going to talk about a very interesting subject, and actually it's involving the protests that have been going on in London and the climate change debate and the whole subject of it, really. And we've got a spokesperson for Extinction Rebellion on today. She's also a Green Party member for Ealing, and she is the founder and director of Resolution Possible, and that is Marijn Van de Geer.
Hi.
How are you, Marijn?
I'm very well, thanks, Joe.
Good. Thank you very much for coming on.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm honoured.
Excellent. And also, I've got with me is the Moose, who is also with me on my podcast. Moose, how are you doing?
Not too bad, thank you. How are you?
Very well. So, what I wanted to do for my very first show is to try and understand this whole climate change sort of debate. Now, I've done some research on it, Marijn, and I've been looking into it. And I want to just understand from, I wouldn't say I'm a layman because I'm a flood risk engineer. So I know a relatively amount of climate change.
Yeah, that's definitely a good starting point.
So I wouldn't say I'm a layman, but for anyone listening in, just to explain about the group and also Resolution Possible and what you're trying to implement and in fact resolve and rectify in regards to lowering carbon emissions and things like that.
Yeah. So maybe I'll do it in chronological order in that case, because I started Resolution Possible with a friend, and we were talking more about conflict in Eastern Africa. So it's, kind of a bit unrelated. But what we very quickly found out is that things are so connected. So we were campaigning about this one specific conflict in northern Uganda, southern South Sudan. And the more we found out, the more we realized there was just a particular narrative that we in the West were given about that conflict. And it was actually really deceptive and really wrong. And we just found more and more things like that. And we really wanted to create a space where we can start thinking about the impact our decisions make on things like conflict, but also the environment, things that we think we're doing the right thing, but actually we have massive impacts on people around the world, on things that are happening. And so it kind of slowly evolved into this, rather than us campaigning about this single issue, it was more about, do you know what your impact is, and do you know the choices you're making, how that's influencing people's lives, the environment, everything. And so slowly but surely it became this sort of research group that started looking at, better choices you can make in terms of consumerism, but also I was doing a lot of stuff on local politics, how, people should just be involved in politics much more and really engage, not because, you're a politics geek and you love, but because it's everyday life, every single thing is about that. And then the environment thing kind of became more and more of an issue. And that's around the time where through the Green Party, I met some people who were doing this campaign, Stop Killing Londoners. And they were an individual group called Rising Up, and they were doing these air pollution protests. And so this is several years ago now, and that group kind of started to develop this idea of, they were doing stuff on Heathrow, they were doing stuff on air pollution, and they were like, well, actually, this is all part of a bigger thing. And so the idea of Extinction Rebellion came about.
Very interesting.
So so I knew Roger Hallam and I knew Claire Farrell from that, and I invited Claire to come and speak about the air pollution thing at my local Green Party. So it was all like really small and little, and and then suddenly one of them was like, "Well, we're doing Extinction Rebellion now. Do you want to join?" And I said, yeah, that sounds like something that needs to happen. And so slowly Resolution Possible kind of, for me personally, went on the back burner a little bit, because I started to see that making these small little changes as individuals was probably something more for about 10, 20 years ago, whereas now we've just come to this point where we need much more radical changes than that. And I wish I'd started Resolution Possible 20 years ago, and that we'd all been doing these things and making these decisions. And now it's kind of come to this point where, this radical group seems to be.
Well, they've gained so much popularity now in the last 2 years. Negative and positive, isn't it? And obviously, you're exactly right in the resolution possible thing, and sort of what we need to do as humans. Most definitely, we need to sort of fix that in regards to animal agriculture and how we behave as humans with the environment in mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Extinction Rebellion. So yeah, you've joined Extinction Rebellion. So it's the methodology, isn't it, of what they undertake as in protests now, and what is the cause of that? I mean, why is it that they feel that they need to, you know, from a layman's point, you can see on the press and how they behave as a protest in London, stopping bridges, and it gets a lot of negative press.
Yeah.
So what is the actual angle of it? Do they feel that, you know, if you look at the statistics, you've got the vast majority of the nation actually feel negatively about Extinction Rebellion. How is that going to sort of help the cause in regards to, because it seems like their form of alienation is going on?
Yeah. So I think the theory behind the disruption and the non-violent direct action is that we don't need everybody on board. We just need to make enough of an impact to have the government sit up and pay attention. And unfortunately, you know, I don't know about you, but I've written to my MP, I've signed petitions, I've gone on protest marches and all this stuff, but it's easily ignored.
What policy do you need to change though in the UK in regards to lowering the carbon emissions?
That's a great question. And I think for Extinction Rebellion, what's really key is that we are not the ones proposing these policies, because at the end of the day, you know, as Boris Johnson says, we're just a bunch of nose-ring crusty hippies. So what do we know about changing policies? What XR's job is that we are here to say we have a massive problem and it needs to be fixed. And clearly the government alone can't fix it. And that's why we are calling for this Citizens' Assembly on Climate and Ecological Justice.
And that's just like a democratic sort of council that you would go in there and people would obviously listen to you speak about climate change and things like that. But then in regards to that, that's why, you know, I'm not actually against Extinction Rebellion. I know actually climate change is real. It's just the methodology of what they're undertaking.
Yeah.
If you're saying that they're going to go into a council to go through a policy of voting and everything like that, when you're alienating the public in regards to protesting, I don't understand how that's going.
Yeah, so I think what's really important to understand is that Extinction Rebellion wouldn't have anything to do with the Citizens' Assembly.
Yep.
We want the government to commission it, and then it would be run by an independent charity. There's various charities in the UK who've done lots of these kinds of processes before. They've been smaller scale and they haven't had very much media attention, but you know, that sort of thing has happened before. So and the citizens on the assembly are selected randomly. So it could be anyone, and it could mean that no one from Extinction Rebellion would even be on the Citizens' Assembly. That's a very likely possibility.
So in regards to the overall, so the rectification process, what Extinction Rebellion is asking for, I mean, the UK has had a pledge to be a zero carbon emission country by 2050.
Yeah.
And Extinction Rebellion want to basically put it to 2025, I believe.
Yeah.
Is that practical?
Well, no, what would have been practical is if we'd started doing this 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I think we've now reached a point where when you look at the science and when you look at, you know, when the temperatures start to increase, you start to see processes that start to happen that will then quicken that or speed up that process. So for example, if the ice melts, it means that, you know, that could be through man-made temperature increase, but that process will then add sort of natural temperature increase, because with less ice you have less heat reflecting back into space, you have dark water that absorbs the, you know, the whole thing. And so once you get to that point, there's nothing we can do anymore to stop it. So the urgency is that if we have to pull the emergency brake now, otherwise we're going to get to that point. And lots of people are now arguing that actually we've already passed that point. So I'm not a scientist. I can't comment on that. And I fear that might be true, but I'm still hopeful that maybe we do still have a chance to stop. We just cannot let that ice melt, because that is game over for us.
And that's what, well, looking into the climatologist studies, and how they're going to try and invent some form of geoengineering to try and put into the atmosphere to try and cool the planet because of the actual situation of the way the climate's gone. And obviously, I mean, the practicality of trying to make this country a zero carbon emission, I mean, wouldn't it like wipe out whole industries and make the working classes more?
Yeah, so, and that's exactly why we need a citizens' assembly, because those working class, it would be proportional representation on this thing. So it would be the majority of citizens on the assembly would be working class people who would stand to most likely lose their jobs. So the point of the Citizens' Assembly is that we consider what is fair. That's why we're really, really adamant that it has to be on climate and ecological justice. Right. So it has to be just for the people. And that's why the people have to be part of the solution, because only they know, if you say, okay, we're going to shut down the mines or whatever, then obviously you have the miners, but it's everything else, the people with the little calves around who lose their business, and it's the people who, so it's going to be this huge knock-on effect that those people will know, if you shut this down or you change that, that's going to affect me. And someone else in the assembly will say, that's going to affect me. So you need to make a plan. We need to make sure no one gets left behind. And it's possible, you can retrain people. There's going to be so much work to do if we are going to radically change the economy. We need the political will. The money is there. The abilities are there. It's not impossible. It's just that to people, I think the only reason why people would say it's impossible is because they genuinely don't believe that, in the next 5 years we could be going over 1.5 degrees.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think there is, with all the facts that are there and the way that we are going, that so many people choose to look the other way? And
financial.
And
yeah. I think this kind of fits quite nicely with your conspiracy theory program, because, I've got all sorts of theories in my head, and I'm sure everybody does. I think it's on so many levels. I think it's psychological as well, just thinking that, you walk down the streets of London and you just think everything I see is going to change. That the central line is potentially going to be underwater by 2030. It's just incomprehensible.
That's a debatable study, though.
That is a debatable study, but it's a possibility. And I think that's, we have to, if there's even the slightest chance that might happen, you think I've
studied the hydrological data, and it shows the latter part of the century is when actually we're going to have problems with flooding. And the GLA report confirms that. So, okay, let's give you a theory then. Extinction Rebellion get what they asked for in the UK. We have an assembly. They become a zero carbon emissions country. Is it going to resolve the global problem?
No, then we have the job of being leaders in the... Well, but so China, everybody always says China, but then I'm like,
25%.
Where does our stuff come from? The microphones we're talking into right now, the headphones I'm wearing. And I think this is a huge problem that we don't recognise, is that we're looking at the emissions created on British soil only. And there's just been a climate assembly, which the report just came out on Thursday, commissioned by Parliament, and they only looked at the emissions in the UK. Obviously, more than half of our emissions are being created abroad because of the food, the clothes, the stuff, like everything we buy. So if we expect to order something on Amazon Prime and it to arrive within a few hours, and we expect it to be cheap and, all those sorts of things, then a place like China is going to have to produce that for us at a very cheap rate, cutting corners in terms of emissions. So this is something that the UK as a, in the international arena needs to address as well. It's saying, okay, how are we going to continue buying stuff like this and expect China to stop emitting greenhouse gases at this rate. So
Yeah.
I think it needs to be much more cooperation there. I think there needs to be an understanding from us in this country that we can't just keep buying stuff.
I completely agree with that. But you look at it from an overall sort of perspective, and it is a global problem.
Yeah,
absolutely. And then you look at the percentages of the carbon emissions that come out of certain countries like India, Iran, Saudi Arabia, that we don't purchase some stuff from. And then you're looking to call for legislation and policy in the United Kingdom. And when you start seeing protests and start seeing the working man that can't go to work and can't cross London Bridge and things like that, when you're calling for policy, which I completely understand why you're doing that. But when you've got a global problem in China, India, and France and Germany have also, but they're obviously modern. The European Union is very modern in regards to zero carbon emissions. I think it's around 27 countries that have actually pledged to be zero carbon by 2050, which includes the UK. But when you look at China, India, Russia, who have not made the pledge to the Paris Accord, what are you going to do, or what can we do to try and influence them to say, okay, well, we need to become a zero carbon emission country in order to, resolve this issue? How are we going to get involved? They're communist states. They won't see you're protesting. That won't go out to them. So how are we going to get this to these people into these countries?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I want to say is, disrupting working class people getting to work and things like that.
I said the working man.
Sorry, oh no, just anyone, yeah. Everyone is disrupted. And I think, that's something that's actually really difficult for most of us. And we don't want to do that, obviously. We don't want to disrupt people in that way, but it's the only thing that makes the government sit up and pay attention, because it's costing them so much money having us there, and it's the only thing they care about.
If it was a protest that was global and you were trying to influence these countries, these communist countries, and that have huge inputs on the overall carbon outputs, then I would be thinking, do you know what? Yes, this is great. I understand their cause, and they're causing as much disruption. I've watched a presentation from, is it Mr. what's his first name? Hallam?
Roger Hallam
today.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like a lot of the stuff was just to try and gain as much disruption as possible through the popularity of the group, rather than actually resolving sort of the climate change the global issue. And that was one presentation I've seen of him, and that was on an Extinction Rebellion YouTube. There's obviously many others. I'm just drawing my conclusions from that. But it's just this global issue. So, and that was the theory that I give you, that if you got all of your way, and by 2025, yes, with zero carbon emissions, it's not going to have any.
I think the most important thing,
because we're looking for practicality here. We actually want to resolve the problem.
Yeah.
Is this going to resolve the problem in the UK?
I think, but we have to start somewhere.
Yeah, but by 2025 to implement this serious, to try and make, do you not understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, but what I'm saying is that it's definitely possible. There's no doubt about it that it's possible, but
in Russia and China and...
Well, but that's not up to us, right?
No.
So we have to start in the UK, because we're in the UK, this is where we have control, right? So if the UK can prove that it's possible, then why wouldn't other European countries follow suit?
Well, I think they have. The European countries have. So we've got 27 countries of pledging. So we've got Germany, France, the UK.
But they all of them still have a long way to go, and none of them are going to be carbon neutral by 2025.
No, 2050.
Yeah, but 2050 gives us a 50-50 chance of staying below 1.5 degrees.
Right.
So I think, if we are able, why would we not do it as soon as possible now? And, if we can't influence emissions from other countries, which there must be ways that we can. Again, this would be not up to Extinction Rebellion. This would be up to the Citizens' Assembly to decide. But we can play a key role in the international arena, and we should. But I think that needs to be done by leading by example. And if nothing else, at least we can say we tried to the future generations, and they say, well, you knew about this, you didn't do anything. At least in the UK, if we did it, we can say, well, we did our best and we tried. I think just because we think China is never going to do it or Russia's never going to do it, that's just not a good enough excuse not to do it here.
No, and I completely understand the implementation of Extinction Rebellion, and especially that the group that you've created is trying to make you a better person in regards to your self-well-being and trying to improve the environment. That is 100% agree with that. But what I'm thinking of is the actual global issue and how it's going to be rectified.
Yeah.
And I don't understand the methodology that you're currently undertaking and how it will be. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just going back, but Saudi Arabia, Iran, and these countries, and yeah, the European Union, it's great by 2050, but whole industries will be wiped out. And then you look at the economic point of view and how you're going to carbon tax people, and in order to try and lower the emissions.
Yeah. But that's, and that's really what we want with the Citizens' Assembly, is that if whole industries do get wiped out, that doesn't mean disaster.
No.
That's actually an opportunity, that people get retrained, they get new skills, that we make sure that people are looked after. And that's, and that's why we can't possibly, as Extinction Rebellion, make up those policies, because we don't have, well, we don't have the right, but also we don't have the capacity to do that, because we are not the people. It's the people who need to decide that who are going to suffer from it the most. How are we going to make sure that they remain able to put food on the table every day?
How do you feel about the geoengineering standpoint? The sulfur, about the particulates in the atmosphere that they plan. So, the practicality of it, and that's what the climatologists predict, that we've gone far over the scale now to be able to try and implement these policies to countries, because they're so poor that from the economic standpoint, we'll have so many people on the street and so many people without any heating that it's not practical to implement this. So the geoengineering and what the climatologists predict now is, or they're trying to research, is particulates in the atmosphere, is sulfur, in order to be able to lower the temperature. And I think that's probably more of a practical angle. I know, obviously, you don't, because the methodology is not actually improving. We're not trying to, we're still going to be dumping plastics. They're still going to be wasting water supply and things like that. But I'm just thinking of the practicality of it. The
practicality is we need, the reality is we need to change our lives. We cannot carry on like this. And we can think of all sorts of, technological things that might be done. If it's something that it isn't scalable right now, then I think that is a huge gamble to take on a future, on a technology that doesn't currently exist on the scale that we need it. And it doesn't. And what's interesting about Climate Assembly UK, for example, again, the report came out a few days ago, is that the Assembly members resoundingly voted against carbon capture and technologies like that. And they said, no, we have this technology. It's called peatland, it's called wetlands, it's called forests. That's what we need to focus on.
Right.
And I'm inclined to agree. Those are the tried and tested methods. That would also resolve our biodiversity loss issue, because obviously it's not just about greenhouse emissions. It's also the fact that we are losing our biodiversity. Our soils are no longer fertile. We're putting all sorts of chemical stuff in there that's just so scary. Our oceans are becoming more acidic. So I was really pleasantly surprised, because Extinction Rebellion have been quite critical of Climate Assembly UK because it was working towards the 2050 target. Right. But actually some of the recommendations that the Assembly members made were really very radical, and I was very pleasantly surprised personally that they said, no, we need these natural, protect and enhance our natural environment to see us through this. Because also, wetlands, not only are they carbon sinks, but they produce oxygen, and also they help mitigate flooding, all these things. So that makes sense to me. But again, that's my personal opinion.
No, I completely agree. And also, but you've got to remember that even though in regards to your policy or what you want to implement, the UK is still one of the forward thinkers in regards to this. I mean, we've got the ULEZ, it may not be enough, and then we've got the extended ULEZ. We've got every development now that under the Flood and Water Management Act has to have some sort of ecological sort of implementation, like a microclimate, have to have green roofs and things like that. But the UK is still doing some form of.
They're definitely doing something
compared to where we was 20 years ago.
Yeah,
as I say, honestly, it may
absolutely.
not,
And I think I have lots of friends who are civil servants, and they're saying to me like, Marijn, we're really trying, and we know that, and I feel for the NGOs and the civil servants and everyone who's trying to implement these things. I can feel the frustration because they're trying so hard and they know what needs to happen, but they've got a government who aren't listening and who aren't taking this seriously. They, when the Climate Assembly UK report came out, we had Alok Sharma sitting there telling us how many amazing things the UK was already doing. He didn't once say, yes, we're committing to these recommendations from this report. He didn't say, yeah, we're going to, try and go carbon neutral much, much quicker than 2050. There were just no commitments there whatsoever. And it makes me very, very frightened, frankly, that we have a government that just don't seem to get it. And also what frightens me is that when they eventually do get it, because soon there won't be any denying of what's happening and that we really do need to act, I don't trust that this government will do it fairly and justly and will make sure that everybody is looked after. I really worry that...
It's one of these debates, and looking through it, it is so polarising. The climate change resolution, it seems to divide people. It seems to be, like a divisive issue, because you've got some people in the country that just think, they're protesting again. And it seems to be, as you look at the economics, as you go up in GDP, and the more affluent sort of areas tend to care about environmental issues more than they don't, if you study the economics of it. And in history, if you raise the GDP of a country and the working classes tend to have more money and more wealthy, then they tend to take care of more environmental issues. Obviously, I don't think that's going to sort of rectify the actual severe problem that we have. But it seems like, just reading on the news, that... it is this dividing issue. It seems like it's more alienating people. Some people that see, oh no, we do need to do this, and there's people completely on the other side that we need to engage with and need to be engaged with to understand what the actual severity of the issue is. And I just think it's so it has been politicised as well.
Yeah.
And it just seems to be a bit of a mess of how we're going to get to this.
Yeah, and that was so interesting about Climate Assembly UK. Like, as much as we think, it was inadequate because of the target date, it was really interesting because they actually... so with the random selection of people, you do then what they call stratify the sample. So you make sure that the sample you've got reflects the UK society. So they did it based on sort of age, gender, socioeconomic background, geographical location. Right. But what they did in this case as well was how people felt about climate change. And they used a poll that was done last year, and they made sure that the assembly reflected that. So they had people who really didn't care about climate change whatsoever. Then they had a few people who were really, really worried about it. And then everyone in the middle who were like, which is the majority of people, I think, who were like, yeah, it's a thing, but I don't really get it, and I don't think it's that bad, and, life goes on. And it was so interesting to see that when you have this space for proper conversations where, and they have facilitators on the table, so you're not just kind of left to your own devices and, you have the loud mouths and the more shy people, but everybody really had the opportunity to have their say, but also to listen. And they came together so much more. And
that's what we need more of, isn't it?
I think so too. And I think we just don't have this opportunity anymore to sit and listen. And we assume they think this, and they assume we think that, and it becomes this sort of them versus us. And actually,
the media plays a great part in forging that, unfortunately.
And that, even though I didn't agree with the Extinction Rebellion protests in central London when they were stopping the roads, I did agree with the one that you recently done at the newspaper.
Murdoch.
Completely agree with that.
It's, yeah.
But again, you've got the general public, they tend to come out and go, oh, they're at it again. But you do your research into it. That's what people need to do. Just do your research into these issues. And even climate change as well. And it's one of these things that a lot of people, because it is very complex to try and understand climate change. And climatologists, they have different views on stuff. There's no doubt that we are in a climate change, and there is no doubt we are contributing to it. And it needs to change. But it's this engagement and education that is needed. And I think if that was undertaken, especially all around the country and even the world, then we'd start to
It's
see
so interesting you say that, because again, sorry to keep going back to Climate Assembly UK, but that was their main thing was, we need more information from the government and from the media. Like, most of them had said afterwards, I had no idea about any of this. I've never read anything about it, seen anything about it. Why is this information not out there? And that was so interesting. And it kind of really goes with, we're always standing there saying media needs to tell the truth. And it goes to show that people really do want that information. Yeah. And I think also we underestimate how much information people actually can grapple with. I think it's complicated, but I dropped all my sciences at 16. I was awful, but even I'm slowly starting to understand the basics of climate science. I mean, it is, if I can understand it, anyone can. I mean, it is possible.
Well, there's so much out there on YouTube now. You've got so many lecturers. It's very easy to see and what people and the methodology and what they're trying to undertake and about the group and climate change itself. Yeah. You just have to go on YouTube and just look at the lectures of professors. Obviously, there's going to be counterintuitive stuff on there, people climate deniers and things like that.
Yeah, but I think it's quite useful to listen to them as well, because, very often those arguments do fall apart as you go into them more and more. And I think it's important to understand that those people are out there as well, and they just as much as everybody else live in this country and have a right to their opinion. Isn't
it scary though, one of the most powerful men in the world has pulled out of the Paris Treaty? And
I mean, it's things like that, it's things like that make me so worried. Yeah, the United States is a huge contributor to emissions, to biodiversity loss. And I don't know what we're going to do about that.
Well, maybe he won't win the next election, and then I imagine if Biden wins, they'll rejoin the treaty. That will happen. So the most popular figure I'd say in climate change now, and the figurehead is Greta Thunberg. What's your opinion, Greta? Because again, polarizing. That a lot of people don't actually, because the argument is that she's a young girl, she has a high functioning autism. Yeah. It's a hell of a lot of pressure to put on a young girl. Yes. All of this, she's not going to school, everyone knows. Obviously, it's a serious issue. But when she come across in the most famous speech that she done, How Dare You one, it was more of an aggressive standpoint. Do you feel that was needed, or do you feel that it was too much? Do you think that coming across that way is going to, again, put the barrier up?
I think that speech was really addressed to those people in that room who have the power, they have the money, and they're choosing not to act. And I think it was completely justified. That speech wasn't meant for us at home who are, that was really specifically for those people. Yeah. And I totally agree with her. And had I had that platform and been there, I would have said exactly the same thing, because they are literally saying that they are accepting that millions of people are dying and already dying in the global south, especially.
From climate change?
From climate change related issues. So we've now got crop failures. We've got this huge locust issue in East Africa, for example. There's desertification. There's major flooding. Like, they have endless droughts and then huge rains, and none of the water even absorbs into the soil. They have landslides. They have people losing their homes. The weather is unpredictable now. They used to have rainy seasons, dry seasons, rainy seasons. In Kenya, that doesn't really even exist anymore. They can't plan their crops anymore, that sort of thing. So this is already happening, and that's just one country. And basically those world leaders are saying, yeah, we accept that. We accept that all those people are dying or at least struggling from that. That's unacceptable. And I think... I don't know anything about Greta. I mean, I met her once and you know, probably just said hello. And that was at the declaration back in 2018, 31st of October 2018. I think when I was 15, 16, I certainly wasn't thinking about climate change or the environment. I wish I had been, you know. I always say to my mom, like, why didn't you take me on protests and make me more political? And she's like, well, I didn't know, you know, and that's the problem. Like, we just didn't.
But there's the argument as well. Now, if for a 15-year-old to be able to do what she has done, there's no doubt that she's exceptionally talented and charismatic to be able to do that. In my eyes, is still a kid. But the argument is that she still is a kid, and to be a figurehead of that such a complex issue, that should she be experiencing her childhood rather than sort of being a figurehead of a thing that she really isn't an expert in?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what happened there. It's, you know, it's obviously a family. What I've read about it is that she had severe depression.
Yes.
And then when she started becoming passionate about this climate stuff, she finally started speaking again. She started coming out of her room again. And I can imagine that the parents were like, we don't care as long as she's out, she's eating again. You know, if she wants to dedicate herself to this, we're happy because we've got our daughter back. I can imagine as a parent that you don't care what it is they're passionate about, you just support them. And, you know, if that gets them up in the morning, great. I think it's massively escalated since then.
But she's a worldwide star now.
She's a worldwide star, but I think she is back at school now. I think she had a year off and then now she's gone back to school. So, I can't imagine being a teenager living with crippling depression like that. No. I can't imagine living with autism. And if this is her outlet way, then I can imagine as parents that you're just like, great.
But also works on an inspirational level as well for other children in the same situation.
Absolutely. And you see as well, for example, in XR Youth, you've got a lot more openness there about children with autism, for example. It's not sort of swept under the rug anymore, and people are now openly saying, I've got this, but this is how I sort of manage it now. And, you know, it's not a sort of woe be me story, but they're like, I have this and I have this condition or whatever, and I'm coping with it, and that's who I am. And that's, so if nothing else, that's very, very reassuring. And then, you know, the youth strikes, the Future for Fridays, all that stuff.
What's that, Future for Friday?
So that's Greta's thing. So that's her, you know, she started the school strikes.
Yes. Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Okay.
So lots of kids all over the world. I think she strikes every Friday, but I think some kids strike sort of every first Friday of the month, or everyone does it differently.
Oh, okay.
But that's that was the idea behind it. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So I'll wind it back a bit. So about the group Extinction Rebellion. Now I've watched a lot of representatives on LBC and other radio shows. And funding come up, the subject of funding. Now a lot of the protesters paid.
No, sadly.
Well, it did come up in one of the representatives with Nigel Farage on LBC, and for the London protest, you did say that some of them were being paid travel. Costs. There is sort of what they call voluntary living expenses. So some people, if they have to travel from God knows where, you know, there's money for, you know, arts supplies and, you know, things like that. We had so are they being paid to get the travel down to the protests?
It's if you're part of one of the organisers and you're helping organise things, and you're like, I need to travel from here to there to do this or to pick this thing up or something like that. And then there's a little bit of money there. We used to have more money, but obviously Corona hit and the funding just completely dried up. So I think what we've done in the past is hired buses to get people from, the regions into London. We've definitely done that. But we do things like we make sure people can stay at, if people are wanting to come to London, then they can stay with other rebels. Again, this time round, it's been really hard because, with coronavirus, do you want people coming to stay with you? So that's why this time round, the process was just a lot smaller. And also that's why we had the huge events in Cardiff and in Manchester as well. So it wasn't just London this time round, although London went on a little bit longer than Manchester and Cardiff. Okay. But in the past, we've certainly had, I've had some voluntary living expenses support in the past when I was really doing, 50 hours a week, kind of, seven. Yeah. So.
But you're, higher level spokesperson. You're traveling around and I imagine doing a higher level work, or is that just for protesting?
No. That was for being part of the media messaging team and for being part of the Citizens Assembly working group. Right. Yeah, I see. But that's that's all dried up. So now we're all kind of going back to working part time and doing this as much as we can. Yeah.
Okay. So what the overall funders of the group? Now, I read a press article, so it probably might not be true.
Oh, I don't know.
It's a press article about Sir Christopher Hole, who is the main funder of Extinction Rebellion. He has. So this is the investigation that Christopher Hole is one of the main funders of a £50,000 fund going to the group itself, but he actually has huge stakes in Heathrow Airport and Luton.
Okay, honestly, that I have no idea about that.
It can be Googled, and it's just one.
I will.
But I mean, it's a media headline, so I thought you might know a little bit about that because I thought you might have been debated about it somewhere along the line.
No, this is the first time we've been asked about that. I know that we've had lots of sponsorship from companies like Lush, and then loads of just individual, donations. I'm really sorry. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. He's a hedge fund billionaire.
Yeah,
right.
And he does support causes like that, but it seems like if it is true, like a smoke and mirrors type thing, because if he's got vast amounts of shares in Heathrow Airport, it's obviously a huge contributor.
Personally, it sounds unlikely to me, but I don't want to give you a definite answer on that. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, because, we're obviously really against airport expansion. Of course. I would be very surprised, but not sure. Don't quote me on that one.
So we've done had the recent protests last week.
Yes.
So we've timed this perfectly. Did you see the Winston Churchill statue being graffitied? Was that Extinction Rebellion?
The Winston Churchill statue. What was it on? Sorry, I've had my head in climate assembly.
Recently, I think it was a few days ago, his statue was graffitied, and the press was saying it was Extinction Rebellion.
Okay.
Because the protests were obviously there.
Yeah.
And I just think, do you find that the media tend to try and hype things up to try and put a bad name on the group, to try and really turn the public against them? Or do you think that...
Yeah, I think what's been really frustrating and really disappointing, and I think says a lot about the kind of media we have, especially in this country, is that it's very tabloidy. And the story is constantly about Extinction Rebellion. Yeah. And we're like, the story is about the climate and ecological emergency. Yes. And we are just doing what we think is the best possible way of getting people to talk about that. Unfortunately, with that comes that the conversation does turn to Extinction Rebellion. That's been incredibly frustrating, and the kinds of questions that we are getting are, they're wanting individuals' names, they're wanting, they're even putting people's street names on some press release or on some of the articles and stuff, and I just think it's so sad actually that this is what journalistic integrity looks like now, and I just think. Argue with us about climate and ecological breakdown, argue with us about, is this really necessary? How urgent is it? Yes, it's pretty bloody urgent. So yes, it is necessary as far as we're concerned. But then it becomes about these individuals. It becomes about the group, you know, whether we're an organized crime
that
thing
was
now. I was
changing?
like, well, I'd love for someone to come to some of our meetings and see how organized we are.
Are they actually going to make you an organised criminal group?
I don't know what's happening with that right now, but that is what I think Priti Patel wanted to.
So what will that mean after that? Will that mean you can be... Well, you get arrested when you protest anyway,
Yeah.
don't you? But what will that change?
I'm not entirely sure. I mean, we've had this before where we were in a prevent leaflet. We were categorized as a terrorist group as well, along with.
Oh, that's unbelievable.
So I don't really know. I mean, I don't know if they'll actually manage to get this through to put us in that category. If it does, I don't know if it means that our protests are no longer seen as expressions of freedom of expression, or if they will be seen as criminal activity. I don't know. We've got a wonderful legal team at XR, all, again, volunteers and helping us, and they're all looking into what all of that stuff is going to mean for us. I think it's truly... Again, sad that something like that gets said.
Yeah.
We're not here because...
No. And that's like the questions that I've just asked you. A lot of it is about XR and what they've done in regards to the protest. But again, it's very true. A lot of the press are covering, oh, look what they're doing, look at the disruption. But there's actually a real issue here. Yeah. And it seems to take that away from it. And even in the questions that I've asked you, it seems to be more about what XR have done, the Winston Churchill statue, because it's something that I think the general public is sort of being geared up to see Extinction Rebellion in that way. Yeah. From the way the media's portrayed them. Yeah. But what do you foresee as an expert? So what do you think will happen here? So, you know, in regards to implementation and policy, where can you see it going?
I don't know. I don't know if I can really see what's happening. Things are changing so quickly. I mean, this time last year, who would have thought that we'd be in the middle of a pandemic? Yeah. You know, we'd have lockdown and things like that. And that's going to affect it as well, because obviously a lot of funding's going to be taken away and a lot of people are going to be, a lot poorer. Yeah. So, well, exactly. And, especially when funding for a lot of the people who used to work full time on XR stuff, when they had, a little bit of money to support so we could pay our rent and, pay bills and stuff. And that was sort of, minimal, but it was enough to keep going. That's gone now. So a lot of people are now looking for work in a climate where there isn't any work and where we're unable to go into offices and things like that, or it's getting slightly better, but so yeah, I think that's hard. In terms of what's going to happen with policy and what's going to happen in the future, my fear personally is that something really, really bad in terms of the climate ecological emergency is going to happen, and that's when politicians will wake up to it, or at least that's when the public will say, this has now gone too far, we need radical action on this. My fear is that kind of event will mean something really terrible happening to a lot of people. And in an ideal world, we would start implementing solutions before that sort of thing happens. I mean, that's my fear. Whether or not we succeed, I think, for example, this climate and ecological emergency bill was tabled 2 weeks ago by Caroline Lucas. It's a private member's bill. And what's quite nice about that is that it's an alliance bill. So it's not an XR thing. A few people from XR were involved in writing the bill, but it's from all over, Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth and like all sorts of people, all sorts of scientists, lawyers, social scientists were all involved in composing that bill. And we now already have over 50 MPs supporting this bill. And I think maybe that could be something that, if that does get passed, the bill asks for real radical solutions to the issue. maybe that could be something that even a government who don't want to do it, if enough MPs support it, then they will have to, and that will sort of force.
It seems to be, and also it's been obviously politicised. It seems to be a right and left wing thing now, doesn't it? It seems like the more climate deniers with Trump and things like that, and all throughout Trump's. The people that work with him deny climate change, which is astronomical.
I think a lot of people do accept it. The amount of people that I've spoke to that say, I know it's there, but by the time it happens, it's not going to affect me anyway because I'm going to be long gone.
Yeah.
But I'm just in regards to Trump.
Sadly,
it's not the case.
It's going to be in our own lifetimes, yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen the data and the modelling of London and what they predict, and it's scary.
Yeah.
It is scary what they predict for the latter part of the century, and vast majority of London is underwater. And obviously, they've got to change the Thames barrier and everything like that because of what they calculate. And climate change is a very real thing, and it is just unbelievable that the leader of the most powerful country in the world is against it. And when you have someone like that who is that represents millions and millions of people, it's not going to help the cause, is it?
No, it's very, very frightening. And also, President Bolsonaro in Brazil, where, such a huge part of the Amazon rainforest, which we rely on so much, is in control of that country. That's really scary. And then also at the same time, the politicians in Australia, for example, where we have the Great Barrier Reef, which we really need to be protecting, that they are going for new open cast coal mines in Queensland and all those kinds of things. So, we have a lot going against us, sadly. So, I think sometimes, because sometimes you do sit there like, oh, do I really want to go sit on the street and risk arrest again? And, I don't want to do...
met with any adversity on the street by anyone in the public?
The public, yeah. I mean, there are people who are genuinely really upset because they have to try and get somewhere, they're losing money, and it's awful, and it's an awful position to be in, and you do get shouted at and you do get a lot of abuse, and I'm generally a person who doesn't really want to piss people off, and most of us don't, and it's not nice. But then I guess it gets outweighed by the people who sit there and they say, yeah, you guys are really annoying, but I support your point and I do agree. And people who say, I'm worried that there's going to be some kind of implementation of some kind of ban on vehicles and that I'm not going to get any subsidy for that. I'm not going to get any support. Right. And that's when we can say, well, that is exactly what we want to prevent with this citizen assembly, that you get to sit around that table and say, well, I rely on my vehicle for my income. So how am I going to move along with these solutions that are being suggested, and that's when people are like, oh, okay, well, that's quite interesting, because the biggest fear obviously is people, for example, in my country, in the Netherlands, on TV you have these big burly farmers in tears because they are being told they need to halve their livestock numbers. But there's no indication of, is there going to be financial support for them? Are they going to get retrained? Is there anybody there who even cares about them? And they are so worried and so scared that in the Netherlands we have the tractors protesting rather than Extinction Rebellion. And it's not because they don't agree that their industry is very much responsible for some of the emissions, or for a lot of the emissions. They're completely on board with that. But what they're saying is, this is not fair. This is my livelihood. Yes, I want a better future for my children, but how are we going to do this? Yeah. And also, they're saying, what about industry? What about aviation? Yada, yada, yada. Like, why are we being picked on? And I think that all those kinds of things could easily, well, not easily, but could be avoided if you had a citizens' assembly, so that the farmers could say, okay, well, this is the agreement we have received and that we have played a part in creating. And, you end up having those kinds of conversations on the streets with people that you're blocking, and then they do change, or not change their minds, but they become more sympathetic. And some people just genuinely support us.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, we knew you were going to be here. We knew there was a chance that we were going to get stuck. So, off you go.
Me personally, I do partially support Extinction Rebellion in regards to the climate change. But me personally, with the protests, what they're undertaking in London, and what they stopped, and you hear a lot of stories about people going to hospital and things like that. But when you start to do the research and the severity of the issue, you can more understand it. And I've actually been researching it now, probably for the last 3 or 4 weeks, really doing some research into it. I know a fair amount in regards to flood risk, particularly to London, and what we do in regards to, to mitigate those issues. But I ask anyone that is watching this just to do your research into it and start actually to look into climate change and what needs to be done, because it very much is a serious issue, and even it will be in our lifetime. And it's something that is coming, and millions and millions of people could potentially be homeless. And that's what they're saying, that and they predict that people are complaining about immigration and things like that, but once these things kick in, you have millions of people trying to move.
It's going to be completely unmanageable, the amount of people that are going to start moving north from the global south. Because they won't be able to feed themselves, or they'll be flooded, or there'll be drought, or whatever happens. If you're worried about immigration, then you need to be worried about climate. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, you've got anything else to say, Moose?
Yes, regarding on your plan of attack, so to speak. So say, for example, you have an idea that you want to implement over a certain amount of time and say, right, we'll go to the print works, or we'll go to London. How is that put to the group? Is that on a vote? Do you say we're going to do this, and then majority of people go, well, actually, no, we're not comfortable in doing that? Or how does that work?
Yeah, so, this is exactly why we laugh so much when people are calling us an organised crime body, because we're like, we're not very organised. It all comes together in the end, but so we have circles. So I'm part of the media messaging circle. I help with, not that much anymore now, but press stuff and spoke stuff. And then there's the political circle, which I sit in with the Citizen Assembly Working Group. Okay. But then there's the action circle, there's the regenerative culture circle, there's all sorts of different aspects, outreach and education, like all these different things, and everyone sits in those circles, and they all also interact with each other, of course. There's and there's also now the Hive. So it used to be quite London centric, and now they've got all those circles are sort of replicated throughout the regions of the UK as well. So they all come together and work with each other. It is basically, you come up with an idea, you go to the action circle, and it gets deliberated, there's a process that we go through when you can say, well, I think there's harm in that there could be harm in that proposal, and then you explain why, and then they're like, okay, can we adjust the proposal so that harm is avoided, or does it just get scrapped, and that whole thing. But then it also, that idea will also go to the political circle, for example, and they can sort of see, what would be the implications of that. It'll go to the media messaging circle to check in with the messaging. It'll go to police liaison, for example. So they are like, well, if you do this action, then you're at risk of breaching this, and that. Yeah. And then it's kind of up to the rebels to decide, well, yeah, we're happy to breach that. Or like, oh, no, it's a bit too spicy, won't do that. So, yeah, it's a bit of a faff. It goes through a lot of different processes. But, that's how in the end it does get decided. And there is very much this understanding that some actions some rebels are happy to do because they are up for arrest and, sort of happy to give up their liberty and risk, having a criminal record.
Some of these people have been arrested 40, 50.
Yeah. There's some pretty, But then there's loads of people in XR who will never get arrested, who don't want to get arrested, who don't want to interact with the police in any way. And they are still hugely valuable. They do so much work. And so it's a bit of a mixed bag of things like that.
Sorry, no, carry on.
Regarding as well that Extinction Rebellion are known for peaceful protests, rather than violent. Do you have to have any experience in dealing with someone that's gone into business for themselves to push an own agenda? So, say for example, a hypothetical situation of, say, a monument being vandalised that hasn't got anything to do with what you want to push out there. Are they then pulled aside and said, look, this isn't to do with us. All the media are going to pick up on is this, where we want to push this.
Yeah.
So do they face any punishment from the group? Are they ostracised? Is it you've been warned, or do they just get kicked out straight away?
We don't tend to kick people out. Like we had, for example, this time last year, we had the Canning Town incident where people sat on the tube and actually, thinking they were going to disrupt, city bankers, but actually they ended up disrupting people coming home from their 8-hour shift in the middle of the night. And it was just awful. And that those people had made that proposal, and a lot of people disagree with it, and they went ahead with it anyway.
Right.
And that is the reality of it. And I think they all, on hindsight, said, that was a massive mistake. That was a really stupid thing to do. The damage was done, and it was frustrating, especially because a lot of people within the movement had said no. But I think that's just the nature of the beast. It's a rebellion. People get really into it. They get swept up.
I understand.
And like with the spray painting on the Churchill statue, you could argue that it is all interconnected in certain ways. We have more and more influence from an international perspective, where with the Black Lives Matter movement, where we're starting to finally understand, which, as white sort of Europeans, I guess we're quite naive about, the slave trade and the start of environmental degradation, the deforestation and the creation of plantations and all those things, the extraction of materials from colonies. Those are all sort of interconnected.
It's not justified to spray paint a war hero statue, though.
Well, but lots of people don't see Churchill that way.
Well, I mean, when you stood up against probably the most racist, fascist regime in history, in one of them in history, and then this country was accessed, a lot of people are going to get very angry when they see that. And when people do that, that's not going to help the group.
No, sure. And I don't know the ins and outs of what happened with that. What I will say is
I think it was the same with BLM. As well, I don't think it helped them any way to do that. It's just alienating a lot of people. I just don't understand.
Yeah.
I mean, the slave trade... sorry.
Go on. No. I think the problem is that we don't understand, and that, I can't imagine what it's like to be a person and my surname is the name of the person who used to be my ancestors' owners. That sort of thing. Like, I can't imagine what that's like. I can't imagine not knowing where in Africa I'm from or what my traditions are, what my culture is. I can't imagine that. And knowing that, your ancestors have suffered like that, I can't imagine that anger. And I don't know that... I
think in regards to the overall engagement of it, I mean, as a group, you want people to be into touch with climate change, and you want people to look at it and do their own research. That's part of the group. You want to change policy. But when you start doing acts like that for me, that's when it just gets beyond a level, and I can't support it, because you're never, ever going to get the support of the public when you start doing graffitiing of statues that are a part of people's history. And that may be, the history of the United Kingdom is the history of the United Kingdom. It's history. And that cannot be changed. But in regards to a movement, I think a movement needs to be able to get people to be in touch with them, to understand them, and to engage.
Yeah, I think
rather than alienate. I don't understand that method.
I think before you can educate, you have to get people in that position to want to listen first. And it's the same as I don't look I haven't looked too deep into it until, as Joe said, recently. But when you do look into it and you go, oh, wow, this is quite bad. And you go, oh, I've listened, I've opened myself up to be able to take a little bit in, rather than saying, oh, Nick, come on, I've heard about it for years, with ozone layers all the way back in the early 90s to so-and-so and et cetera, et cetera. I've heard it all before.
It was global warming, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Actually. Then it went to climate change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to be able to say to someone, listen, I've learnt this, please be open to be listening and to listen and to be educated about it and take out of it what you will. But then it seems such a waste to ask somebody to do that, and then they switch on their telly and they turn, and as Joe said, turn around to me and go, why deface an ex-Prime Minister's war memorial when I was up for listening?
Yeah.
And it's pushed me away.
Sure,
It must be frustrating as well, from your point of view, to say, that's probably pissed a few people off.
Yeah. And again, I'm
I
really
understand.
sorry. I should have prepared on this one.
I
I'm
totally
really not
understand.
entirely
It's
sure
one individual.
Yeah, of course.
what happened and who did it and why. Well, I should really know that, but I don't.
Well, yeah, you haven't got his name.
But I can totally understand that no matter what you do and where you go in to try and get your message across, people are going to get pissed off either way.
Well, I think there's an issue that, we can all agree that there's a severe climate change issue, and, I'm going to wrap it up here. But we can all agree that we have a big problem that we need to address. And Extinction Rebellion are a polarising group, but you have to say that the popularity that they've gained into it is going to have a lot of people researching on the back of that.
I hope so, and that's really what we want.
Yeah.
Just they don't have to join us, but as long as they start learning about the reality of the situation, and maybe then we do need to start writing to our MPs again or something like that. Maybe if that is just the one thing that XR has achieved, then I'm happy.
Are you finding a lot of new members of a particular age bracket, or is it more young, or is it more of a mid or a more older generation that's showing more interest recently? It's
a massive mix, which is so nice about Extinction Rebellion. I'm working with 16-year-olds and people in their 70s and everywhere in between. And I've had a lot of jobs and I've never really worked in that kind of context. So it's a huge mix and people do it for very different reasons. It's the youth are just really angry and then it's, people in their 70s who are doing it for their grandchildren, for example. And then everyone has their own reasons. So it's a huge mix and more new people have joined this rebellion as well, despite the pandemic and despite the controversy.
Wow.
I think we've done inductions for new rebels and new people have joined, so it's a real mix, so it's great.
Stuff.
Any more?
Yes, actually. Sorry to keep.
No, this is great.
Sorry, last question. Would you like children to be educated a little bit more, especially in primary schools, about the situation going on at the moment?
I think so. And I know that a lot of people are like, why are you frightening these children?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I think there are ways of educating children about how we need to look after the planet without frightening them.
Without scare tactics, yeah I understand.
I think if you can explain to a child, how it all works and how it's all interlinked and how, if you do certain things, then that impacts that. Yes. And that impacts, I think that is a great thing to learn for children. And, I do a lot of nannying and a lot of them know a lot about it already. They know about bees and they know about protecting trees and they know about ice melting and, they know about, you should walk to school or things like that. And, but yeah, more would be good. Yeah,
I've noticed it starting. I've got a younger daughter that's at school now, and she's bringing home books that are implementing that environmentally friendly into just standard reading books, which I've only noticed quite recently.
Yeah.
So it does look like it is changing.
It is, yeah. And now when my friends have babies, I'm always buying them this special edition of the Lorax, which has like little ideas. And I'm like, oh my God, why did we not listen to the Lorax? Many many years ago when it came out.
There's no doubt people are becoming more educated about it because they have to be. But yeah, I mean, Marijn, thank you so much for coming on.
No, thanks so much for having me.
It's been so interesting having you on and understanding the group and yourself. Where can we find you, Marijn, for anyone watching? Obviously, you present your own radio show as well, don't you, on Soho Radio, which is Rebel Radio, and your website?
So we, I guess what's the easiest way of finding us? You can listen to us on Soho Radio Tuesdays and Fridays at 11. And then we are on Mixcloud, XR Rebel Radio on Mixcloud as well. So after the show goes out, we upload it there and you can listen to our shows. And then, the Extinction Rebellion website. Also, if you're interested in citizens' assemblies, we have XR Citizens Assembly .uk, I think. I should really know that. Where we've kind of made a separate little website with our working group, just with all things related to citizens' assemblies for people who are like, what is it? How does it work?
Absolutely fantastic. Check Marijn out and check her shows out. Marijn, again, thank you so much. Moose, thank you as usual.
You're very welcome.
Been absolutely great. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you.